Hello and welcome to the Gaggle, where we challenge and, if necessary, destroy media narratives. I'm Peter Lavelle. Well, both conventions are over. The major parties in the United States have had their conventions and shown their candidates. Obviously, Trump running for re-election and Joe Biden with his running mate Kamala Harris. Both conventions talked about how to demonize the other side, particularly from the Democratic side, that Trump is just a bad person, okay? I don't think that's really something you can run on, but they're running on it, okay? There was an absence of policy. The GOP, on the other side, equally lacked a lot of policy thinking. And so we've gotten down to a beauty contest. A country that's in the middle of a pandemic and an economic downturn that could even, for 40 million people, it may be even defined as a Great Depression. So I want to focus here on how both parties addressed or didn't address foreign policy. I'm joined by Daniel McAdams, and of course we have George Samueli. Daniel, from what you saw of it, because I know you're pretty close to a hurricane right now, but you didn't have to watch a whole lot of it, and you didn't have to watch all of it to draw conclusions. Go ahead, Daniel.
No, I think you make a good point. You know, the Republicans trot out Tom Cotton, who gives us the same old foreign policy, and people like him. And the Democrats, you know, they've got the same neocons. There was this group of, 70-some former national security experts, i.e. the losers who've gotten us into all these wars, signed a letter in favor of Biden. So it is like the old Tom Woods saying, no matter who you vote for, you get John McCain when it comes to foreign policy. And I don't want to spoil it too early, but I will say there's one bright light, which is Senator Rand Paul, who gave a very good speech. Whether it was completely accurate that Donald Trump is the anti-war voice is up for question. However, between the two, it's clear that he's made the anti-war rhetoric much more strongly than Biden has. And I guess with Trump, there's a promise that he might fulfill some of his earlier promises next time, where with Biden, we know that we're going to get Bill Kristol and John McCain, et cetera, et cetera. So one bright light, a lot of dim lights, not a lot to cheer about.
Yeah. I mean, we had Nikki Haley being brought out also, which was much to my chagrin, and she's actually seen as a favorite for 2024. But there seems to be schizophrenia in both parties and how to deal with foreign policy, and I think that obviously they didn't want to show it as being schizophrenic, but they were covering all their markers, as it were, here. Because anyone that looks at the election returns for 2016 is that it is irrefutable now, is that congressional districts had soldiers retired or in uniform that had been sent to these foreign wars, voted very clearly for Trump, for the rhetoric. I remember during the campaign 4 years ago, I date all of us here, both of you were on Crosstalk, and we talked about the glimmer of hope that what Trump was saying might come to fruition. Well, it's a mixed bag, obviously. I'm being charitable here. But both parties are struggling with this because they know that there's an electorate out there. I mean, there's a lot of progressives in the Democratic Party that speak just like, I'm a conservative. We have Daniel as a libertarian. I think George, you're more or less a conservative. But there are a lot of progressives that speak the same language we do on this specific issue. And it is an issue that galvanizes people. George.
Well, schizophrenia is a very good word to describe it, because we had Ivanka Trump, who spoke just before her father, and she made the bold assertion that her father was ending foreign wars. Contrary to the desires of the political elites of Washington, he was ending foreign wars. She wasn't just saying, oh, he hasn't got us into any new wars. No, he was ending foreign wars. And then, as example, she talked about the signing of the agreement between Israel and the United Arab Emirates. And you kind of wonder, well, how is this ending any kind of foreign war? Unless, of course, you mean signing on to Israel's expansionist agenda is ending foreign wars, because then basically just, completely wipe Palestinians off the map, and that would end a foreign war. And we had the same thing with Trump, where he would make comments, well, we're ending all our foreign wars, are entangled, but we spent $2.5 trillion on modernizing our military. Well, if you're not going to get into any wars, why are you spending all this huge amount of money that could be used very usefully elsewhere on modernizing your military? I mean, if you modernize your military, it's going to be used. I mean, there's just no two ways about it. I mean,
Well,
it is.
I don't know. I wouldn't know if I'd go that far. I mean, modernizing the military means you're going to spend money. Well, that's for sure. Okay. Whether there will be wars is open to question, but there's a very high probability if you have these shiny weapons, you will be tempted to use them. But Daniel, there's a certain constituency, and it's Dwight D. Eisenhower coined the phrase the military-industrial complex. I mean, they are significant shareholders in American foreign policy. This is very important for them to be able to continue what I think is a huge grift on the American people, because if there aren't threats, and I'm going to echo something that George is saying, then you'll invent a threat. Okay, we need to stay in the Middle East. It's never explained why. Okay, but we need to. And of course, Russia and China and Iran and North Korea. I mean, instead of having a negotiated diplomatic resolution of these issues, which are imminently possible if you just listen to what the other side is talking about, instead of living in your monoculture, in your bubble about American interests. Go ahead, Daniel.
What I think is interesting is that he clearly understands that saying ending foreign wars is a popular thing, or he wouldn't say it. The party understands where ending foreign wars is a popular thing, or they wouldn't say it. If it was unpopular, they wouldn't say it. What's disappointing is that the populism of Trump, and I think that's one thing that we can all agree on, can't make the connection between spending trillions, enriching already very rich people in the military-industrial complex within about 60 miles of Washington, D.C. or less, and middle America, which is struggling, which is hurting, which could use some of that money back in their own pockets if they even have a job left after the debacle over the economy, over the pandemic. So they clearly understand that it's popular. The other thing, gentlemen, that I wonder about, and I mentioned this on our program, the Liberty Report yesterday, is I wonder about civilian control of the military, because Trump keeps talking about, I want to bring troops home, and the military says no, and they just don't do it. And I don't know if Trump hasn't written a clear enough order, bring them home, or what the answer is, but certainly the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, General Milley, and others are not in favor of doing this, and they're really kind of dragging their heels when it comes to doing what Trump at least says that he wants to do.
George, Daniel brings up that's a very terrifying prospect. And, given the empirical evidence that we've been presented with over the last 4 years, I tend to think even if Trump wrote it out in the simplest possible language, they wouldn't fulfill it. And that's what we had. We all remember this absolute ridiculousness when Trump announced, I guess he was on the phone with Erdogan, well, okay, we're getting out of Syria, okay, and Bolton, I think Bolton was still there, I won't say it on this podcast, but he had a very visceral reaction to it, okay? No, but this is a question that no one wants to talk about because it's so inconvenient, is that the military, I mean, what was the saying, I guess in the early 20th century, the U.S. Navy doesn't recognize the sovereignty of the United States, okay? I think that's a good one. And I think it's applicable today, because it's not because they believe, I don't think it's genuine to believe their claim that is they understand what the national interest is. No, they understand the very material and financial interests of a small group of people. Oh, and by the way, when they leave the Joint Chiefs of Staff, they're going to that company, okay? I mean, there is a pay-to-play issue here. I mean, I can't. All I can say is empirically, you have this revolving door, and I think it's fair to label it pay to play. George.
Yeah, and we've seen this now for years and years. I mean, you remember what happened during the Obama administration when the United States and Russia signed an agreement on joint operations against ISIS, and what happened within hours. The United States launched a military attack on Syrian forces, and that was the end of the agreement. And we saw the other day there was some kind of a clash between the United States and Russian forces. Now, the United States don't know, oh, it's all Russia's fault. But I actually believe what the Russians are saying, that the United States was acting completely out of zone, and they provoked an incident. And I'm sure that there will be more of these provocative incidents because the military types want to provide a rationale for continued stay in Syria. The same thing is going on in Afghanistan. Trump announces withdrawal from Afghanistan. Lo and behold, newspapers start running stories. Oh, Russian bounties on the heads of Americans. We can't possibly leave because that is doing Putin's bidding. So the military have got the media wrapped up around their fingers and absolutely are refusing to adhere to the will of the public, which wants out of these wars.
Yeah, but it's same with that the agreement that Kerry and Lavrov came together for a ceasefire in Syria, and this goes to Daniel's point perfectly, is that I personally believe that Lavrov was able to convince Kerry that this ceasefire would work, okay, because Lavrov would be able to put the appropriate amount of influence and pressure on the Assad government, so that he had that covered. And Kerry maybe, but he was going to give it a go. Then Ash Carter said, "No, I'm picking up my marbles and I'm leaving." Okay, the Secretary of State is not going to negotiate with a foreign government because the Pentagon, well, this is a trough for them, and they're not going to abandon it. They never abandon a trough, Daniel.
Yeah, there was a good article that we have up on the Ron Paul Institute website about why are we really in Syria taking their oil. We don't need the oil. We got plenty of it, and it's not very expensive anyway. Why are we there stealing the oil? And it's about power and control, and it's about depriving Assad of the ability to rebuild his country with the oil profits, i.e. it's Assad must go all over again. It's the same Obama policy that hasn't changed because unfortunately, the personnel is the policy, and Trump has been extraordinarily bad at picking personnel. I can't name a single appointee in a serious national security defense position or even State Department position that's anywhere near the three of us. Forget even where we are, even halfway between Bolton and where we are. I can't think of any. I can think of one person who holds some promise, and that's the president's appointee to be ambassador to Germany. Who I think, Colonel Douglas McGregor, who I think is an extraordinary a person, an extraordinary intellect. Well, he's not a non-interventionist as I am. He certainly, as a realist, would put America first. That would be the first appointee that I know of, and I may have missed some, that actually takes America's interests first rather than the interest of the military-industrial complex. And he's running through a lot of roadblocks in Washington right now.
I have my own private theory about that. That's to keep him off Fox News, off of Tucker Carlson's program. That's my conspiracy theory.
That's a good theory.
George, why don't you wrap it up for us?
No, I think it's a very, very interesting that Trump touts his supposed non-interventionism, staying out of stupid wars, but in fact, he has failed to extricate the United States from any of these wars, and he has provoked confrontations with Iran that could indeed have led to war. And in a second term, I wouldn't bet against a military conflict with Iran. I wouldn't bet against some kind of a military conflict with Venezuela, where he pursues the regime change in there. Syria, I mean, Daniel has pointed out, it's the same Obama policy, regime change. Washington isn't giving up on this. They're determined to get Assad out, and by one way or another. So that's something. There's just no indication that Trump is really serious about this policy. But he was cunning enough to know that there is a real appetite in the country for staying out of stupid wars.
Yeah, and the problem is that if he is reelected and inaugurated, he won't have to worry about breaking a campaign promise. That's right. That is a really depressing thought. And because you two gentlemen always make my day, and and we've ended on a very negative note, but that's reality. That's where we stand. Thank you for joining the Gaggle here. Thank you, Daniel. Thank you, George. And please like, share, and subscribe to this channel, and we'll see you soon.